Hey Year 12, welcome to today's Maintaining a Balance dot point. We're looking at 9.2.1.8, compare responses of named Australian ectothermic and endothermic organisms to changes in the ambient temperature, and explain how these responses assist temperature regulation. So we need to look at what the dot point is actually asking us to be able to do, and this dot point is sort of in two parts. The first thing that we need to do is compare responses of named Australian ectothermic and endothermic organisms to changes in the ambient temperature. So a few important things in this first part. When we compare, we show the similarities and differences. So we're showing similarities and differences of responses of different endotherms and ectotherms. When it says we need named Australian ectothermic and endothermic organisms, we actually have to have a name of a particular species, okay? We can't just say some snakes in Australia do this or some kangaroos in Australia do this. We need specific species, okay? The other important part is responses. So this becomes relevant also in your next video, but a response is basically some sort of reaction to what is going on at the time, okay? So in particular, the temperature at that particular time on that particular day, okay? It is different to an adaptation. An adaptation is much more of a long-term thing that is developed over generations and generations of species in response to a particular environment, okay? So a response is just what's happening at that particular time. Ambient temperature is just the surrounding temperature, so the outside temperature. And the second part asks us to explain how these responses assist temperature regulation. So when we explain, we sort of relate the cause and effect. So we're looking at what the response is, and then how it helps that particular animal keep their temperature regulated. So, few key words, you may or may not have heard of these before. The terms ectotherm and endotherm relate to the ability of an animal to control its own body temperature. So therm, as we know, is to do with temperature. Ecto means outside. Endo means inside, okay? And thermoregulation is basically the ability of an organism to maintain its own body temperature within certain levels, even when the outside temperature is very different. So ectotherms are organisms who can't control their own body temperature. They rely on the external environment to regulate their own body heat, okay? So their body temperatures tend to fluctuate a lot more. They rise and fall as the outside temperature changes. Endotherms, on the other hand, are organisms whose body temperatures are pretty well controlled. They stay reasonably constant, and it's controlled through their metabolism. So their cellular activities generate enough heat that they can control their body temperature. So their internal body temperature is relatively constant, okay? So there are lots of different types of examples of ectotherms and endotherms. Things like reptiles, ectotherms, so snakes, lizards, all that kind of thing. You often see them out sunbaking in the middle of summer. That's because they need to get heat from other sources to maintain their body temperature. Humans are endotherms. All mammals are endotherms, birds, that kind of thing. So they can maintain a reasonably constant internal temperature. So we need to look at named examples. The first one that we're going to look at is an ectotherm, okay? And we're going to check out the central netted dragon. So the central netted dragon is found in Central Australia in really hot climates. So we're going to, this slide looks at their response to an increase in temperature, so when the temperature is getting quite hot. One of its responses is to stay in sheltered areas, so it can actually dig little burrows. It also generally finds shelter in caves or under old tree logs and things like that. And that helps it regulate its temperature because it gets less exposure to direct sunlight, okay? So that has less direct heat hitting its body that it has to absorb. Another response to hot temperatures is that when it gets really hot in the middle of summer, it actually turns into a nocturnal animal, okay? So it, instead of being active during the day, which it is for most of the year, when it gets really hot, it becomes nocturnal so that it's only active at night. And that allows them to escape exposure to the hottest parts of the day. So they can still get around and be active without being in direct sunlight and getting too hot. So when temperatures decrease, the central netted dragon can change its body position. So it actually positions itself in a particular way in relation to the sun so that more of its body heat or more of its body surface is exposed to the sun's heat. So there's more surface area of its body to absorb that heat off the sunlight, so it warms it up a lot quicker and more efficiently. The other thing that it can do is seek areas of higher heat rays. So finding high areas, ledges, climbing up on top of rocks and things like that means that it gets higher levels of heat because it's that little bit closer to the sun, and that helps its body temperature increase as well. Next thing we're going to look at is an endotherm. So they can regulate their own temperature within reason, but they still need to regulate it based on the outside temperature. So we're going to look at the red kangaroo. Again, this is an animal that is found in generally hot areas of Australia, lots of sandy areas. So when the outside temperature increases, the red kangaroo licks its paws and its inner forearm. And that actually makes, because saliva is moist, that moisture evaporates, which actually takes with it some of its body heat. So that cools the blood underneath the skin. Because the kangaroo's blood vessels are really close to the surface of their body on its paws and its inner forearm, okay? So that's where they're closest, that's why it licks that particular area. And then the moisture evaporates and also takes some of its body heat with it to help it cool down. The other thing a red kangaroo can do when it gets too hot is it digs shallow beds in the shade to lie in. So basically what it does, it digs off a layer of the sand that has been exposed to the heat, and it does it in areas of the shade. So that helps it, A, to get out of direct sunlight, so it's got less exposure to that direct heat. And also by digging off the top layer of sand, it means that the cooler sand underneath is exposed and it can lay on it rather than the stuff that's been in the heat all day. So that helps it cool down as well. So red kangaroos also need to be able to respond to the temperature getting colder, okay? So they can contract their muscles when it gets too cold, which makes them shiver. That means that their muscles are moving more, which generates more body heat, okay? And their internal body temperature increases. Another response to cold outside temperatures is that they seek group warming, okay? So they go and find some other red kangaroos and they all get together, and that way they get exposed to less cold air, but also they can absorb body heat from the other animals next to them that they're giving off. So that's a bit of an overview of the responses of an endotherm and an ectotherm. Don't forget you need to have those named examples, so the central netted dragon and the red kangaroo, okay? And we're going to pop this together with the next dot point as well for you guys in class. So have fun.